talking about the history of Black medicine ways with Sade, the founder of Roots of Resistance, an educational project that seeks to help folks reclaim healing ways interrupted by colonization. Roots of Resistance operates under the belief that bodily autonomy and culturally relevant medical care are essential to liberation, and that learning to heal ourselves is a liberatory praxis of self-determination and resistance. Roots of Resistance is dedicated to helping historically looted communities advocate for their well-being, access quality healthcare, and to find alternatives if Western healing models fail them. Okay, so let's go ahead and kind of move it back to our time now. So how has Black healing been appropriated by the masses? Do you see it becoming a trend within our culture? And I bring in the example of kind of like, we live in California. Obviously, there's a ton of people who are doing holistic medicine and different ways of healing, including like yoga. And we all know yoga is not native to California or native to America in general, but you see it becoming this just popular thing. And you see a lot of white people being at the forefront, or a lot of Westerners, let's say that, being at the forefront of the yoga movement, profiting off of it, but it's not from their culture in a sense. So how do you see that with our healing and our healing ways?
Well, I don't really see African, and to say African, it really means like a bunch of things, because we're not all one people. Like there's so many cultures within, but I don't really see African cultures becoming a trend the same way other people's cultures do, because so much of our culture is already part of Western healing.
Right.
First, they would have to acknowledge everything that they took and everything that they're already using, which is African. But what I do see is a particular brand of American medicine called Southern medicine or Appalachian medicine kind of being used as a more or referred to as a more exotic type of white American medicine that's different than regular Euro-American medicine. And the problem with that being seen as something that's trendy, that white people can use to stand out from the other white herbalists, is that that's all based on African medicine. Right. So that's one thing I do see happening. But yeah, I don't really see it becoming, quote unquote, a trend the same way that yoga and other things are trendy.
What about like as far as the appropriation of Black healing?
Do I see that?
Do you see that? Yeah.
Yeah, but I see it as being so invisibilized that it's hard to recognize what it is on the surface. Like you just see people using stuff and you don't even recognize that it belongs to you. Right. Or maybe it's attributed to another culture altogether. If we bring this back to plants specifically, like there's certain plants that will become really popular among white herbalists and white healers. Like for a while it was turmeric, and it was ashwagandha, and then it's moringa, and they just move on to different things. Well, moringa is something that has nativity in Africa, and a lot of people don't know that. So, a Black person that might be reading a health magazine is like, oh, moringa's in right now, okay, and you learned about it via whiteness, and you don't know that comes possibly from your background. I say possibly because maybe you came from a region of Africa where moringa wasn't used, right? So, you're introduced to something that's possibly already part of your culture via whiteness, and you never know that it's something being appropriated, right? Same thing with ashwagandha. White people, white herbalists appropriate ashwagandha via Ayurvedic medicine. So
Can you explain that?
Ayurvedic medicine is a sect of medicine coming out of India. And India has had many different influences on their cultures. There's many different Indian cultures, and there's many people that have come and gone. And so white people exotify Indian cultures, and they exotify the medicine, and so they latch onto some of the healing ways and remove them from the context, and this includes the plants. And so I found out about ashwagandha via white people who were practicing parts of Indian healing ways without a real understanding. But they said, you see this plant right here that you've never seen before? It's Indian. And I was like, okay, well, I like it for some reason. Yeah. I just really love this plant. I don't know why.
Yeah.
And it turns out it's used in every region of Africa.
Wow.
Yeah, it has so many indigenous African names.
Yeah.
And so many sophisticated uses of it. Sophisticated meaning there's some plants where, depending on the time of year that you pick them or the part of the plant that you use, they can be poisonous or cause you harm. But if you have
depending on time of year?
Yeah, the time of year or the part of the plant that you pick, it can harm you. But if you really understand this plant and you have a relationship with it, you can use it in a variety of ways. So ashwagandha in Africa is used both as an abortifactant and to promote fertility.
Are you serious?
Because these people know how to use it.
But is it like different parts of it? Like one will
there's the leaf, there's the root,
and one will cause one thing, or one will cause fertility, and one will
there's different parts that are, and also when you mix it with different things and prepare it different ways, right? So, when I found this out, I was really angry because I was told that this belonged to another culture, and I found out that it's used throughout Africa in so many different ways, and it has nativity there. It may also be native to India. I'm not saying it's not, but the point is, why did it only get introduced as an Indian plant?
Right. And do you find that a lot with different plants, like just a miseducation, I guess, of like the origin? Yeah.
A lot of times when we hear about plants that are Mediterranean, basically Mediterranean is code word for European. It's like Mediterranean equals European, even though Mediterranean is supposed to be a region where 3 continents meet.
Right.
And most of the Mediterranean is Africa, right? So you have like all of North Africa, a little bit of Asia, and a little bit of Europe, right? But Mediterranean equals Europe. And so constantly plants that are from the Mediterranean region get put into the European category. Yes, Europeans also use them. Even if it originates from China and it was introduced to Europe hundreds of years ago, it is now also part of European medicine. But they can't erase everything that happened before that. And I see that so often with African plants.
And do you, because I'm really big on like intuition, and do you just have a feeling like when someone says like, oh, this is from, I don't know, India or whatever, like you just have a feeling like, wow.
So like a good example would be tamarind. So tamarind, I grew up in Latinx neighborhoods, and because I'm from Southern California, where there's a large population, and so I grew up eating a lot of Mexican foods, and tamarind is very much part of that culinary history. And so I thought I loved tamarind because it was part of really good, delicious foods that I'd eat.
It's what they put on the fruit, like, am I right?
And it's also made into a delicious drink. And it's also delicious to just eat. Like, it's also something that you can find in a lot of different Asian cuisines too. Like, it's delicious. So I was kind of like, well, duh, of course I like tamarind. It's amazing. And then I find out, because I'm studying Indian medicine ways, and I'm like, oh wow, Indians use it for medicine too. And because their medicine is respected and studied, you can find lots of literature on all the different ways tamarind is used to heal people in India. And an important thing to know would be how Indians enslaved Bantu Africans for hundreds and hundreds of years on their sugar plantations and the other plantations that they had there. So their medicine has been heavily informed by our healing ways for much longer than our medicine has influenced Europeans, right? So when we get introduced to something as Indian medicine, it's like, is it really though? Right? Like, what influence have we had? And then if we have something in our practices that might have come from India, it's kind of like, well, how did that get there? Maybe there was some forced assimilation too, or some exchange during trade, right? But anyway, so I'm reading about tamarind, and I'm reading about it in India, and I'm like, wow, look at all the ways they use this. So I guess it's a medicinal plant too. I wonder. I wonder if anybody else has used it medicinally, right? And then I'm doing some research on the name, and turns out the name tamarind comes from Arabs. Because Arabs went into India and they kind of ruled for a little bit, and they did what the Europeans did and kind of like renamed everything, cataloged everything, and they're like, oh, this is the first time I've seen a tree like that. It must be native to India. I'm going to call it the date of India. And so now, like thousands of years later, we still have this colonial legacy. It's an Arab colonial legacy on this plant. We still call it tamarindo, tamarind. We call it date of India because the Arabs who were like taking Africans to be enslaved into India and like ruling India said so, right? So you just see how these legacies can remain. So, but anyway, to bring it back to Mexico, I was like, but how did it get to Mexico though?
Right.
And I was like, okay, well, it must have been the Spanish. Sure enough, the Spanish were ruled by Arabs for a while, right? So they brought a lot of plants that are associated with Arabs, right? Well, I'm going to say Arabs because it's like plants that are of Arabic tradition, right? That they got from who? Right, they got from Indians, they got from us.
Yeah.
Right? So the Spanish now had awareness of all these plants, and they brought them to the Philippines. They brought Filipino plants to Mexico. They brought Mexican plants all over, right? So they spread, they did botanical disbursement, right? Throughout these regions. And at no point do Africans get any credit for the dispersal of these plants. We have to attribute it to the Portuguese or the Spanish. But anyway, so I was like, well, tamarind must be in Mexico because the Spanish set up plantations in Mexico, right? They had colonies in Mexico. And then I find out, oh yeah, well, Africans used tamarind while in Mexico. That makes sense. I mean, I guess they found out about it through the Spanish, and that's when they started using it. Still hearing nothing about the medicine ways of Black people in Mexico. Right? And then I'm digging deeper because I can't let that plant go. Right. And another thing that kind of had spurred me is I find out that in indigenous African religions that were spread throughout the diaspora, I don't know about continental, like on the continent, but I know in like Latin America, Africans had used tamarind as a tribute, as an offering to different African gods. So I was like, well, okay, maybe they got tamarind, they got the knowledge of tamarind from the Spanish, and because that was available, they offered it. Right? This is my logic. This is my logic.
Yeah, no, I feel you.
And I'm kind of like, okay, but what god did they offer it to? I'm like, okay, they offered it to Alegba, who was like the god of openings, the god of roadways, the god of pathways. You have to talk to him first before you can access the other gods, and you offer him tamarind. Then I'm digging deeper and I find out, no, actually tamarind is native to Central Africa. So it's native to sub-Saharan Africa. And then I find out its meaning to African people. So it is a sacred tree. And a lot of trees are sacred. Africans believe that there's a spiritual aspect to plants, especially trees. And you meet under a lot of trees. Like a lot of trees are meeting places. But tamarind is a meeting place for both spirits and the living. It connects those two worlds.
It's like the opening door. Wow.
So it's a spirit portal. And so like
my goodness.
Africans who were enslaved believed that they could lay back in the hollows of the tree and they could go back home. I think that might be like through astral projection or something like that. I don't think they maybe like got up and flew, but maybe they were able to visit home, either the ancestral plane or their homelands via this tree. And so there's all these rules about like not leaning on the tree, not sitting under it, not going around this tree at night because a spirit will follow you home, right? So there was this idea that this tree is like more sacred than other trees, and it's something to be revered. And as it's a spirit portal, it's something that you would offer to the God aspect that is the gate opener to the spirit world. So like this spiritual significance, I only found out by going backwards, right? No one said at any point, this is a sacred African plant. This is a sacred African tree, and it's important in indigenous African religions. Also, it's tasty and medicinal. Nobody told me that. I was told, oh, this is a Latinx medicine by brown people, right? Or a Latinx food, by brown people. Then I was told it's an Indian medicine by other brown people. And I had to go back and like retrace the roots of slavery, the routes of slavery, in order to figure out that Tamarin belonged to me and people like me.
Right.
So you have to do this work, and oftentimes that involves reading a lot of things you don't want to read.
Right. Yeah. And I think too, I'll be honest, people nowadays, they don't like to research and they don't like to read, but it's so important to read. Like, I know we were talking about reading both sides of things, and then also just opening your mind and educating yourself, because like that's something that I definitely didn't know. And I think you have to be willing to do that research, because that goes all the way back. Like, how long did it take you to...
It took me about 2 years. And I mean, I wasn't constantly reading up on Tamarin. It was like every single time I would read something, I'd find out a new fact, and I would kind of just store it away, like, oh, that doesn't seem really important, right? And then the next time I came across something, I was like, wait, what is that I learned before? And I would bring that forward, and I was like, oh, okay, this is how they fit together. Right. So eventually I had collected enough puzzle pieces to put together the whole story. And I mean, I wouldn't say I have the whole story, but I have like a large enough story to tell.
I feel like you have more than me.
To use it as an example of how a plant can have a history with a new people, and that's okay, but we need to not erase the people that originated it, the people that grew up alongside it, the people that cultivated the first children, right? So Tamarin is a Mexican plant, right? It's been there for 400 or 500 years, and that's okay. Lemon balm, chamomile, lavender, all of those plants are not native to Mexico. There is a native lavender in this area, but the ones that people count as lavender, like, those are not native to this area, and a lot of times people will claim them as only theirs, and that's where the problem comes in, because if it only belongs to you, well, who used it for thousands of years before you got it? Right.
You're not telling the full story or the full narrative of the plant, and discrediting a group of people because of it.
And we lose our history.
Right. That's the main thing. Wow. Thank you guys so much for joining us. For more information, Sade's information is going to be in the video description. Keep checking back at tiffanylashay.com for more videos about reclaiming our power, mind, body, soul, and have a blessed day.